Runners had chased breaking the 4-minute mile since 1886. Some even thought you could die if you did. Everyone believed it was impossible until May 6, 1954, when Roger Bannister ran a mile in 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds at a meet in Oxford, England. Roger shattered a 9-year-old record, and in the next 9 years, his record would be broken 4 times by 5 seconds. His record only lasted 6 weeks. Roger opened the floodgates to runners running sub 4-minute miles. So what's holding us back from growing our businesses exponentially? Welcome to the Get Business Savvy podcast. I'm George Black, and this is AJ Bishop.
The most impressive part about that story is that once he was able to break the record, then people were able to do it 6 weeks after him, which I don't quite understand how that's possible. It's like when you say open the floodgates, what someone's never been able to do before or recorded to, all of a sudden one person does it, and now what was physically impossible now becomes possible. How did he open the floodgates, and what's going on there?
Yeah, this is an absolutely fascinating story, AJ, because it is about changing your mindset. In fact, Roger even talks about this, where this was more psychological than it was physical. And so let's get into this, because we need to change our mindsets about our businesses. And I think what Roger did can show us how. And you just evidenced it with once the 4-minute mile got broken, not everyone set records, but a lot of people were running sub 4-minute miles when before Roger, no one had.
And so once Roger proved that it was possible, and since it was a psychological challenge, people then saw, oh, this is possible, and then that somehow led them to believe they could do it?
I think that's right, because in studying this scenario, I've come up with, I think, three actions that we can focus on to create similar kinds of breakthroughs. Sometimes what holds us back is we don't believe it can happen. And once we see someone else do it, whoa, now we can believe it.
And if Roger never saw somebody do it, how did he get started on this?
So here's the history of what happened. In 1952, 2 years prior, Roger was at the Helsinki Olympics, and he ran the 1,500 meters, placed fourth, but set a British record, okay? There was something in that achievement that caused Roger to just believe with deep resolve he could break the 4-minute mile, and he began to pursue that. Keep in mind, Roger was a full-time medical student at the time.
Okay, so if we're going to assume that Roger, he's in both track and medicine because he has a passion for those two things, Roger was just kind of living into his passions and then found a great goal that he wanted to accomplish, and then just started to pursue and believed that he could accomplish it, and then just started to pursue it using both those passions, running and then medicine. And
yeah, so I think this action is, you have to believe with resolve. Now, let me complicate the story a little bit, because at the time of 1954, so I don't know, probably a couple years prior to that too, there were two other men, world-renowned men, chasing this 4-minute mile and breaking it. It became kind of like a global story thing. So one of them's in Australia and one of them is in the Midwest in the United States.
And what made Roger different from these other guys?
You know, I haven't studied the other guys very closely. Clearly they wanted it. Okay. So they had direction and they knew where they were going. I've got to believe they didn't believe. And see, because I think the lack of believing with resolve is the number one killer of entrepreneurial endeavors. And then the second killer is lack of direction. So you think you know kind of where you're headed. Okay, that might get you a little ways down the road, but you got to be clear on your direction. But before that, you need to be clear that you believe with absolute resolve.
And I completely agree with that, because if you don't believe with resolve, then you're going to start thinking of reasons it's going to fail. And as you start thinking of reasons it's going to fail, you're going to start thinking of reasons to protect yourself in the case that it does fail, because that's just the natural human tendency, is to try to protect yourself from the downside. But once you just start living in I believe in all of the upside, I believe in the mission, I believe in the direction we're going in, then you don't even think about failure. You're only thinking about ways to succeed, and you're putting yourself in a completely different frame of mind there.
You're right. I think that what starts to happen is what triggers the negative thought, like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work or not. I think what triggers that is setbacks, and you will have setbacks. I'm just thinking of our podcast. Okay. I mean, so we're recording, this is episode 69, and it has taken huge resolve believing that this podcast is going to impact entrepreneurs and really help you guys elevate your business and your growth and your profitability and all things to where you're doing it.
Yeah, to get to 69 episodes here, it's taken the most entrepreneurial resolve I've ever had, and it's showing me more and more every day. With as you commit to believing that it's going to work, you don't think of reasons it's going to fail, or you don't think of what do you do if it's going to fail. You just only think of reasons to eventually we're going to find success, and we just got to keep on putting out content. We got to keep on finding new ways to adjust our content or adjust how we're marketing our content, or all the different changes that we've done and you've seen on the channel. That's just part of getting over step backs, and that's just part of the process when you believe in the mission.
A secret to, I think, resolve is it's got to be in your passions. It's got to come out of your passions. If you're just thinking, I'm going to do this for the money, you're going to die on the vine. The money is so far not coming. And, or a lot of people, I'm going to write a book for the money. Well, no, you're not, because money ain't going to come that way. You're not going to make money on the book. It's okay to do things for money, but that's not a passion. There's got to be a love for writing, or a love for doing podcasts, or a love for sharing and helping others. You've got to have something else in the tank, because that's what gives you resolve. When we're looking at numbers, right? We're saying, okay, that didn't perform as well as we had thought, or we're not seeing certain things happen on the timing we think they should happen. Well, resolve is, I'm going to keep doing this until I break the 4-minute mile.
Yeah, I like how you say passion is where the resolve comes from, because I'm going to break the 4-minute mile, and I will die if I do so. If that's what they say, it's going to happen.
Well, actually, on that point, Roger says in an interview, I think it was like on the 50th anniversary, he says in an interview, like, okay, these people thought we were going to die if we broke 4 minutes. I had run a mile in 4 minutes and 2 seconds. Well, why, if I ran 2 seconds faster, this is Roger talking, would I die? He goes, that's absurd. He's also becoming a medical doctor.
And that's part of his resolve too, is to say I'm not going to succeed. That's absurd. That's true resolve right there.
Good point. Yes, exactly. And here's the thing is that after winning the 1500 meter race, he set direction. And I think this is the second an important action you have to do. He set a next level for himself, and that was to break the 4-minute mile, which would have set a world's record. It would have done all kinds of things, right? And so he started developing strategies on how to go about that and do it. I suspect that the day he started training for that 4-minute mile, he probably knew from experience he wasn't going to run a sub 4-minute mile. It was going to take time. And I'll bet it took longer than he thought it would.
Which is a very common thing for entrepreneurs to run into. I know I did. Everything took longer than you initially think it would. Because when you do believe with resolve, and you have that it's a little bit naive at the beginning, when you believe that this thing that I have in my head is going to come, it's going to happen. In the very beginning, you think everything's going to happen faster than it will, because you're in a place where you believe with maybe a little bit of an irrational resolve.
Yeah. I'm thinking about what you're saying. I'm thinking about our podcast, and I'm like, well, okay, wait a minute. What did we think was going to happen? We're going to record a podcast a week. So it's going to take 69 weeks to have 69 podcasts. We skipped a couple of weeks in there. But if you're only recording one a week, to build up to 16, anyhow, the point is, it's like we still thought, oh, this is going to go much faster. How? How is it going to go faster?
You can physically only put out the one a week.
Exactly. So in my book, The Next Level Entrepreneur, the whole first part of the book is focusing your passions. And that's so that we can then create a next level for your business and strategies for that next level, drawing from what? Your passions, what you love, not something you're just doing because someone told you, hey, this is a good business opportunity.
And in the book, you talk about knowing what that next level is, but not knowing how to get there. How did Roger go about coming up with strategies to get there? Or how do you do that for your business too?
So this is really interesting. Roger was completely unconventional. And as opposed to the guy in Australia and the guy in the Midwest, and they interviewed these guys 50 years later, right? The guy in the Midwest was very regimented. So I think he had a very regimented training program. The guy in Australia, he had a different kind of training program where he was running all the time and doing all this stuff. And one of the things that Roger says in this interview is he didn't have much time to train because he's in medical school. All right. And so he goes, but when I did train, I trained 35 minutes a day. Really? Why not 30 or 60 or 45? But no, it was 35 minutes a day. And he goes, and I ran very fast. And I'm like, he goes, why do I need to go long distances? It's only a 4-minute mile. I'm trying to break a 4-minute mile. And I'm like, the absurdity of that is so obvious. It's just like, of course, that makes sense. So I relate to the running because I've run like 10Ks and stuff like that. I've never done the marathons. It's just not my deal. But I'm like, I want to go fast, and it's like, well, if you want to go fast, do sprints, right? It'll make you go faster. That's, I think, what Roger was doing.
Okay. To carry on with the fitness reference here, it's like, if you want to get flexible, do yoga. If you want to get stronger, lift weights. It's identifying what is that next level. And then from there, you can start searching for strategies. What is the best way to achieve this? What's the most common sense way? In Roger's case, what's the most practical way? I only have a limited time frame. And what am I actually trying to do? I'm trying to run fast for a long distance. So I'll just run fast for as long as I can in my day. And I believe that's going to work.
Okay, but wait, this leads to the third action. You have to be willing to change. So you're right. You develop your strategies, knowing your direction, and then you start seeing if they work. Are you getting faster? Are you getting more flexible? Are you getting stronger? Because if you're not, you're going to have to change them. Now, this just screamed at me when I watched the interview. So the guy in the Midwest, the American, I told you, he seemed very regimented. And he would say he never broke the 4-minute mile. The fastest he ever got, you ready for this? 4 minutes and a half second.
Wow.
Dude, change something. Something you're doing isn't working. And it begins in your mind. You have to believe with resolve. So if I don't know if this is making sense, guys, but all these things interrelate. It's not like you can just go do one of them. You got to do all three of these things.
Yes. You got to build with resolve in what you're going to do and what you're going to achieve. And then once you have that clear what you're going to achieve, you have to come up with strategies for it. And guess what? Those strategies are going to require changing because there's a reason it's a next level and not your current level. Right. You have to change something in order to get there.
Yeah. I don't know exactly when this occurred, but maybe a year or so, I don't think it was more than about 2 years after Roger broke the 4-minute mile. He and the Australian end up in what would be termed as the greatest 1-mile race ever. And the Australian, so there's film of this. It's absolutely fascinating. The Australian pulls ahead. Roger says, I let him get a little too far. And so Roger starts closing the gap. Now, this is absolutely fascinating. The Australian doesn't know where Roger is, and he looks over his left shoulder as Roger passes him on the right at the 3/4 mile.
John Michael Landy of Australia, unofficially the world's record holder at 3:58, set in Turku, Finland, is the #1 man right now. Landy and Bannister are now beginning to pull away from the rest of the pack, but the gap remains almost the same between the first two men. The gap is cut now to about 3 or 4 strides, and Bannister is beginning to make a move at Landy. Bannister is kicking very definitely. He's passing Landy. Landy looks the wrong way. Dr. Roger Gilbert Bannister of England over John Michael Landy of Australia, 1-2. We have unofficially here 3:58.9.
You could even hear the guy describing it 50 years later with like resignation, like it was over. He couldn't catch him. I mean, and when you watch the film, it's like Roger goes flying by. Now, everybody's running sub 4-minute miles at this point. I mean, it's crazy. But I think this illustrates the mindset you have to change. Roger was completely unconventional in his training and probably kept changing it to get it to make it faster.
I can't imagine a 4-minute mile pace. That's at least double what my mile pace if you were to see me go run one.
Well, this one writer was commenting on all of this, and he said the 4-minute mile was the perfect mile because you have 4 laps in 4 minutes. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
And earlier you were talking about how failure is going to lead to change. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, does that tie in with believing with resolve? Because when you believe with resolve, you might hit a failure, you might hit a roadblock. But because you believe, you're just going to go over that, and that's going to lead to the changes that you need to make in order to get to that level that you believe you get to.
Yes, and honestly, I got a great little thing here that, and tech guys will know this, or coders, people who do coding and stuff like that. So at Rackspace, where I was helping them lead strategy, I was talking one day with one of the founders who had built all the original code, and he still did all that kind of stuff. And he was sharing with me his little mantra that really was, I think, a coding thing. And it's fail faster, because the faster you fail, the faster you're going to get to success. And see, I don't think the Midwest regimented guy, he was failing, but he couldn't change. And if you're unwilling to change, this isn't going to work. See, the Next Level Navigator tool, it's a strategic process tool in my book, is designed to pivot. We have to pivot to make it work. We've pivoted this podcast a couple of times. We probably got a few more pivots to go. We just don't know what they are because we haven't gotten to them yet. Okay, so this failure is leading us to success. And so tying to what you just said about you've got to believe with resolve, because you're going to fail. You want to fail. You just fail fast. Get it out of the way, you know?
And just because you fail once doesn't mean you're going to be a total failure. It's just one failure and on the path to achieving what you want.
Okay. Whoa, you just swerved into a whole nother conversation. Make a note of this, AJ. So for a future podcast, just because you fail doesn't define your identity as a failure. Okay, let me repeat that. You are not a failure just because you fail. Okay? That's not how it works. It's not your identity. Your identity is based in who you believe you are, who you choose to be, who you're intended to be. All different ways to get there. That's your identity. Failure or success doesn't define you. Don't let it define you. That takes immense resolve. We're going to succeed in our business because we've decided to. We're going to succeed at this podcast because we decided to. That's resolve.
And we're employing strategies to achieve that, what we believe we can. And also we're willing to change along the way as we encounter reasons for why what we're doing isn't helping us achieve what we want to.
Right. And see, like with Roger is a great example of he's fueled by his passions. Okay. And so I find this fascinating. The Australian trains hours and hours a day. Roger trains 35 minutes a day, and he beats him. Roger was admittedly gifted, but just because you have the gift, if you don't develop the gift, it doesn't matter. He developed it, and he figured out a way that worked for him. And that's what we all have to do. We have to figure out a way that works for us.
So what's the world record now for the mile? I'm just wondering after all this talk about it.
Yeah, right. So the record is 3 minutes, 43.13 seconds. It's only 16 and a quarter seconds faster than Roger's. And here's the fascinating thing. That world record has not been broken for 25 years. It was set in 1999. So obviously people don't think you can run faster than 3:43, I guess. So here's what we can learn from all of this. Changing your thinking is like the small rudder of a big ship. Okay. A little turn on the rudder changes the whole direction of the ship. That's how powerful our thinking is. In other words, we can do far more than we believe we can when we start believing with resolve. So to help you with your thinking, let me offer you a spot in my new webinar, the Exponential Growth Webinar. Grab a spot, links below, or just go to getbusinesssavvy.com. And check out last week's video. I know you're going to love it. And until next time, may you live truly free.